Okay, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well on this Friday. We got a holiday weekend coming up. Just wanted to touch base with Dr. Thomas. He's our Chief Medical Director at Human. And before we get started, I just kind of wanted to give Dr. Thomas kind of an opportunity just to speak to his background and then just what he loves about optimization and why he's actually kind of been a part of the team and just integrating his knowledge into what we have and giving of himself and just being part of helping people out, especially in this time of COVID, right? And so just having him educate me, but helping us out with like the antibody test, and we've got some really cool things that we're looking at, like food sensitivity testing and things like that. It's really led us down these new paths and stuff that we think really relate to optimal health. So just real quick, Dr. Thomas and we met in our epigenetics course we both took through a company called Aperion, and they provide DNA testing and reports and training and a lot of background on human precision health and all that. So they've got just a good network of people, and I've met Dr. Thomas through that. And man, ever since we've met, we've been jiving. We went to a peptides conference. We went to Dr. Zach Bush's speech. We went to that longevity conference that was down in Houston. So we've been going to a lot of things, and we've just had a lot of awesome conversations, and just glad we've gotten to know each other, and glad you're helping us out here with Human, and hope for big things in the future for you. So yeah, if you want to just give some background on you, and then we'll jump into the topic today, which is nitric oxide, and that's going to be brought up as well, and we'll kind of just do a little bit of education around that, because you were one of the first people that were talking about nitric oxide when this whole COVID thing hit, and then I see article after article coming out about this, and I mean, it's just a beautiful molecule, and we'll talk about it.
Well, I've pretty much grown up in healthcare. I had an uncle that was back in the day of where a general surgeon did everything, and he had his own hospital out in West Texas. My dad was the hospital administrator. So I started working there when I was 10 years old and moved into the lab and various places around the hospital. Ultimately ended up in the operating room and thought, wow, surgery's pretty cool. So went to medical school, became a general surgeon. Loved general surgery, everything about it, but really kind of mentored from my uncle. He liked taking care of the patient. And it wasn't just about a shot or a pill or an operation. It was really, how do we take best care of a patient? So I've been interested in all aspects of medicine my whole life. And it's funny, in this area that we call functional medicine, precision medicine, which I laugh because one of my favorite guys, Peter Attia, who's a general surgeon, and he's really smart, and he shared, say, are you a functional medicine doctor? And he likes to say, well, I'm not a dysfunctional medicine doctor. And so I've actually been a hobbyist in the area of functional medicine for years, and now we've started practicing it. So I absolutely love trying to figure out, from getting to know a patient, what's out of balance and how can I bring things back in balance the best way possible. So I'm a bariatric surgeon. Obesity is huge. Bariatric surgery helps people get over that really big hurdle where the body's really working against them. That's nearly impossible to get over. The whole world's out there telling people that they can do it through this method and that method, but the fact is, it's very challenging to lose weight and keep it off. People are very good at losing weight, but not keeping it off. And so I very much enjoyed bariatric surgery, because what I learned, that's still only half the equation. You got to learn to change your day-to-day eating habits. And so as you're trying to change your day-to-day eating habits, it's more about change than it is about eat this, not that, because change is hard. It doesn't matter what kind of change, whether it's a marriage or a job or whatever you may get involved in, it's difficult. And changing because you think you need to or should really doesn't get you there. You got to want to change, and then you got to know why that is. And then the little steps from day to day that help you change, they become a lot more doable because you're no longer resisting them. So through this whole process, my point about all that is not to convince everybody about weight loss surgery, even try to sell that, but it really gets you an idea of what's out of balance when you're trying to deal from things. And in that area, what's most out of balance is day-to-day habits. They're really hard to change. So when this whole area of functional medicine is trying to find major areas that have a huge impact that help bring people somewhere close back to balance, instead of living at the extremes and being extremely out of balance. So all you can do when you're extremely out of balance is come closer back to balance, because then other systems get back in balance. So we talk about a systems approach whenever we're talking about precision medicine, and you look at various systems, but ultimately it's which system is the most out of balance. And when I bring that back in balance, other systems get closer back to balance. And so all kinds of things that Bill and I have been looking at, because we like, in the area of longevity is one, we want to live longer better. And so it's not about living longer, it's about living longer better. It's about putting off chronic disease longer. It's about, if you are starting to show chronic disease at a young age, let's really figure out what's out of balance. Let's get that back in balance, because your system's not broken yet. Let's get it before it's extremely broken and not fixable at that point. So when kind of a long introduction about what I do, that's what I do. I'm trying to figure out in any individual person what's out of balance, what's the most impactful thing that I know something about that can help bring balance back to that person. And so one of the things we're going to talk about, nitric oxide, because the cardiovascular system is truly one of our most important systems in our body. You're only as young or as old as your blood vessels. So that's one system that you want to keep working on before it's broken. And our healthcare system tends to be that sick model instead of the wellness model. So we want to get out of the sick model and get into the wellness model. So functional medicine, what is that? Well, we like to, that's where we want to live, in the wellness model, bringing things back into balance as much as possible. So many things that Bill does within human is about doing that, about bringing inflammation, because inflammation, for example, is a very important part of healing. We need inflammation. We do not want to eradicate inflammation, but we don't want an extreme amount of inflammation. And so a lot of things that human does with the cryo recovery and photomodulation really helps to a great degree to bring inflammation back towards balance. So the kind of I kind of went on and probably could, but I probably ought to give Bill a chance to talk.
No, that's fine. I mean, I think that I love that description and that balance and bringing it back to homeostasis, because when you're ready and you're in homeostasis and you're balanced, you can take on more stress, right? And you don't want to continue to take stress when you're out of balance. You don't want to continue to take stress. And the more that you exercise, the more you do cryotherapy and things like that, you're really training your body and training your systems to be more resilient and being able to take on more stress. So that, and the other thing is, you talked about change, right? So like, right now there's huge changes being made and people's lives are being uprooted and things are just completely changing all over the place. And we have to bring that back in balance. And if you're having to do that, let's say you lose your job, but then you also have to fix your health at the same time, you really need to be focused on that health. And so, and you need to have that in order so you can take on that change. And that's kind of where we're at. We're on that front end versus, the back end, but we always understand that there is a place for medicine and we need medicine and it's very helpful. And, it's just like if you get fall down, break your leg or whatever it is, you definitely want to go to the hospital or whatever it is. But the more that you can keep yourself in systems and keep your systems in balance, then the better off you're going to be. So let's segue into this. And like one of the most important molecules that we have, you talked about the cardiovascular system and nitric oxide, and some people may not have ever even heard of nitric oxide. So let's just back up a little bit and speak about what it is and why someone would want to make sure that they have optimal levels of nitric oxide.
So nitric oxide is very interesting. I didn't know too much about it myself until about 2 years ago. And I keep going deeper and deeper down this rabbit hole going, oh my gosh, this is one of the most overlooked, impactful things, as when I say things, that signal and modulate other systems in our entire body. So when your nitric oxide system is out of balance, there's a lot of things, both immediate and further downstream, that just simply aren't going to work well. And so you want to get on that before it's completely broken, because many years of being broken, now you can't fix it. So cardiovascular, again, is the function of the blood vessels is very, very important. The blood vessel, the very inner lining is very thin. It's called the endothelium. And when it's not working well, we like to call it ED, endothelial dysfunction, which is different from erectile dysfunction, but they're definitely related, because the erection process doesn't work unless the endothelium's working.
Right, and that's what Viagra does, is it boosts nitric oxide. Isn't that correct?
Exactly. So the PD inhibitors, that's how they work, is off the nitric oxide system. And so, to get people's attention, everybody cares about that system working well, but it ultimately is originating from the endothelium not producing nitric oxide very well and being a dysfunctional endothelium. So the endothelium, through our diet, lack of exercise, a lot of things, those membranes quit transporting all kinds of things as well. But one thing that in the area of nitric oxide it doesn't do well is convert the arginine, citrulline from our diet to nitric oxide. So what happens is we eat nitric oxide, and when the endothelium is functioning properly, it will, through an enzyme called nitric oxide synthase, convert that to nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is a gas, so it's very limited, but it can be stored within the lysosomes. Those are little packets within the blood vessels to be released as needed also. So that really begins dysfunctioning at a very early age, on average about 40, about right when you really start having trouble seeing without some kind of vision correction. A lot of things start roughly in that age group, but what's sad is now we're seeing that at a very early age group being dysfunctional, even in teenagers. And so we got to get on that. Now, the good news is I can go on and into these pathways, and I want to do that a little bit more, but I don't want everybody to get cross-eyed. The question is, can you prove what you're talking about? And we can. And so there's these test strips that are made by human, and then add an N. There's some others made from other companies. But the bottom line is, if your nitric oxide system is working well, you should be able to put spit on that, and it should be able to turn pretty brightly pink.
That looks good.
Yeah. So you can see on here that there is and mine is pretty much in dark.
Yeah.
So it's dark.
So did you take a Neo 40, or is that just normal kind of where you're at during the day?
Two things today. I exercised, and after I improved my education on the cardiovascular system, I started on 3 different blood pressure pills.
Oh, okay.
So, and they all help with the nitric oxide system as well. So they're all very low dose. So I'm an anti-pill kind of person. In fact, even though my blood pressure for the most part had been doing pretty well, I started noticing that I was having early morning hypertension. But by the afternoon, and I'm 63 years old, and so a blood pressure of 130 over 85 at 63 would be considered a normal blood pressure.
Right.
Many people, in other words. So I wasn't going on medication. But the more I dug into education in this area, I thought, oh my gosh, you want to keep the endothelium functioning very well long before it's broken.
Right.
And so that's where I know how these 3 pills work.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, a low dose, very unlikely to have side effects. I know what they do. And I've started on those, and they really are keeping the nitric oxide doing very well. So Dr. Mark Hewson, a cardiologist, he's kind of a big proponent that you start on these low dose, which is much different than a very therapeutic dose for people with significant hypertension.
Mm-hmm. So me being 42 now, I think, sure I remember that. I haven't had that where the eyesight starts to where you have to bring the menu. I can read it up close, far, whatever. So far, that's good. But I would just take a random sample during the day, or would you want to wait like after an exercise session, or when would you want to test that just to get a good gauge on how your nitric oxide system's doing?
So I'd do it like an hour or two post-exercise.
Okay.
I would do it after eating a meal that has a lot of leafy greens, maybe an hour or two afterwards, and just see how much your diet and exercise influence it. And then just do it on a regular day where you're eating regular kind of foods and see what happens.
Okay.
So if you're able to get it turning pink on a day when you know things that can improve that process.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's only going to happen if that enzyme is working well.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
very likely your enzymes are working well. Well, you've exercised for years. There's a lot of things that help it work well.
right.
But once it's broken, it's going to take a while to get it functioning well again. And it may never come back, frankly.
Right.
So that's why to find out if your enzyme is working well, check it post-exercise, check it after you eat food that's going to help create some nitric oxide, and see if it turns pink. If it doesn't, your enzyme's probably kind of broken. Now, you still want to do everything else to keep improving it, but now you want to be a little more intense. And there's various testing, various kind of blood pressure testing. One's called the endopat that will help people know whether their endothelium's not functioning well.
Right.
But even the omega-3s, when they've been significantly out of balance for a long time, that membrane is not going to work very well. And if the membrane's not working very well, it's going to be a short time before that enzyme is not going to work well.
Mm-hmm.
So back to your question, for everybody, before buying the lozenges that will help people, it's by the strips. They're very, very cheap. And you can get them from the company. That you can probably get from Amazon without it being knocked off and counterfeit.
Right.
I'd still go to the company. And once you make a connection, then you know where to get the lozenges. We're going to give you a link on where to buy the lozenges. It doesn't hurt to buy some, just have them. But you don't need to take them on days where it's turning pink.
Yeah.
Now, the key things that's going to keep it from turning pink day after day after day is one, age over 40. If you use Listerine and kill off bacteria in your mouth at a high degree, and if you're using medications that reduce acid in your stomach. So how that process works is you, when you eat a nitrate, which is meats, but more in terms, we like to think of leafy greens. You're about to ask a question?
Yeah. So on that nitrate, just before we get off it, because I think it's important. It's like, there's a lot of people who like avoid nitrates and avoid nitrates. Well, the biggest food that you can consume is spinach, right? And that has the most nitrates as possible, and I think like what I've read, it's the nitrosomes or something like that. That's actually the part that is damaging or like precancerous or anything like that. But even in cured meats, they add vitamin C to that, so it actually kind of inhibits that. So the people who are avoiding cured meats because they think that they got nitrates in them, well, nitrates are actually good for you.
It's really hard not to have enough nitrate in your system.
Right.
you would, even say you had a genetic problem where you couldn't eat nitrate without getting severely ill, you would have a very difficult problem because would have a very hard time finding something to eat that didn't have enough nitrate. So my point about that is you don't need to start kicking up your meat and cured meat diet to get more nitrate. You probably need to eat more leafy greens because they're good for you in other ways.
Yeah.
But you don't need to kick up your meat. Eat meat, in my opinion, eat meat because you like its taste and texture. Eat it from animals that have been treated well and it's high quality meat.
Right.
And eat small volumes.
Is not avoid nitrites like a lot I've heard before in the past. The nitrites are actually good for you.
They are. Yeah, I mean, you have to have them.
Yeah.
But it's hard not to get enough of them. So when you eat the food, there's bacteria in your mouth that will convert the nitrate to the nitrite in your mouth. Then your saliva is going to carry it down to your stomach, where this acid in your stomach is going to convert the nitrite to nitric oxide, which is going to be rapidly absorbed through the intestine into the vascular system and get all around your body very quickly. So you got to not use Listerine because you need normal bacterial flora in your mouth. And people say, well, what do you do if you don't use Listerine? Well, brush your teeth, dental floss. That really works.
What now? Is it just Listerine or is it all mouthwash?
Yes. So I shouldn't pick on Listerine. All of them that are alcohol based, you want to keep alcohol based. You want to save the alcohol from when you're with your friends.
And limit that too. Right.
And limit that too. Yeah.
Right.
So one of the worst things for the nitric oxide system is what we call proton pump inhibitors. Last year, there were 211 million prescriptions for proton pump inhibitors. So they're hugely prescribed. Huge amount of that is for people that have heartburn and acid reflux and gastritis and other kind of things. But even what we call the H2 blockers, they reduce acid in your stomach. So even they're bad for the nitric oxide system. But the proton pump inhibitors, that's the omeprazole, the Protonics, the Dexilant, a variety of these drugs that people are commonly taking for heartburn. If they don't take them, they have bad heartburn. What's happening is that the proton pump inhibitors interferes with the function of the nitric oxide synthase enzyme in 3 different ways. So in essence, even if your endothelial membrane is working well, even if your enzyme was working well, it's not going to be working well because you're taking proton pump inhibitors, and your little test strips are not going to turn pink. So there's another enzyme called ADMA. We have a name for everything. But the importance about ADMA, they did a big study. It's an epidemiologic study, so they didn't know cause and effect. But all they did know is when they did a blood test for ADMA, everybody that had high ADMA levels had very high cardiovascular risk. And now we know why. Because the proton pump inhibitors increases ADMA by a huge level. There's also another enzyme that actually degrades or breaks down ADMA. And the proton pump inhibitors interferes with that as well. The other thing that the proton pump inhibitors, they pump protons. So the storage areas for nitric oxide, which it's actually at that point not in the nitric oxide gas form, but it can easily be converted, but it needs that proton pump for that to happen. So they're being stored as nitrite, ready to be converted to nitric oxide, but they need the proton pump within the cell of the endothelium to be able to work, to be able to release the storage form of nitric oxide. So even beyond that,
and
you
so
also need,
so lack of acid inhibits that proton pump to being able to downstream create the nitric oxide. Is that what we're talking?
So acid in your stomach, you need that just to convert when you swallow food that's in your diet, converting it from nitrite to nitric oxide. So if you want to get nitric oxide from your diet, you got to have stomach acid working.
So you said 210 prescriptions went out last year, and so people are struggling with acid. So if they're not taking proton pump inhibitors, what are the other options?
So, again, I'm a surgeon. One of the biggest things this is very self-serving. I fully realize that. But I do surgery for acid reflux. I have for 27 years. And it's an outpatient operation. It's a very safe operation. And that will cure their acid reflux, and then they don't have to be on proton pump inhibitors. Now, I don't recommend stopping your proton pump inhibitors because if you're having miserable heartburn, just to work on your nitric oxide. What I'd recommend, if that's the case, if you're not going to consider surgery to fix that and get off your proton pump inhibitors, then you need to keep taking them because you got to keep those symptoms under control. But you definitely, at that point, ought to be taking these lozenges, the Neo 40 lozenges. And so they're a little pricey. This box of 60 is about somewhere around $140. Now, this is the Neo 40 Professional. And we're going to give you a link where it's the humaninpro.com/Dr. Clifton Thomas. Because this, you'll get methylfolate and B12 with it, which also helps that enzyme work well. You might as well take advantage because they're the same price. But you'll get these little lozenges here. And they actually taste good. They kind of taste like a sweet tart of a mild nature. And they make your tongue look a little more red, so that kind of makes your tongue look a little healthier. So the biggest downside of the lozenges is they're kind of pricey.
So could it be diet related? I mean, obviously we know like certain foods could be related, like maybe you have a sensitivity to gluten, or maybe you have a sensitivity to grain or something like that. Could that be causing the heartburn, or what's kind of upstream, I guess, maybe a little bit of that? Like if you were, before you were to, go the route of surgery or go the route of proton pump, was there a step that you could try before that?
So when we do surgery, it's because the area where the esophagus and stomach come together is mechanically out of shape. That one-way valve that should let food and juice into the stomach, but should acting as one-way valve, should not let very much of it.
Hey, Doc. Hey, we lost your, hold on. We lost your mic. I think you're going to have to go without the headsets. I think they might have either went dead or something like that. So, nope.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay. No. I think they went dead.
Yeah, the last one we did, the same thing happened. That's why I'm on the wire.
So I'm going to start over.
Yeah.
Sometimes when people are having heartburn on a recurring basis, the one-way valve between the esophagus and stomach is mechanically out of shape. So the only thing that's going to mechanically put that back in shape and help it work once again as a one-way valve is surgery. And that's what I've done for 27 years. Now, even when that valve is mechanically in shape, there are some medications and some things that will relax it inappropriately. So it's not really out of shape. It's just occasionally relaxing inappropriately. But also, if your stomach's not emptying very well and it's really holding on to food for a long time, the stomach should hold on to food for about 20 minutes. So if food's still sitting in your stomach for an hour and a half, then you have delayed gastric emptying. And even if your valve's only a little bit out of shape, then you're going to have more acid reflux. So my point is, to decide about surgery, you see somebody like me and we evaluate it. If it can be corrected without surgery because the shape of the valve is really in pretty decent shape, and we work on things like improving your diet and some other things that once we improve those, the symptoms go away. Well, that's the answer.
Right.
Now, the out-of-shape valve is very, very common, probably for lots and lots of different reasons.
overeating, late eating, kind of lost the core. So if you lost your core, then that pressure has to be transmitted someplace, and it's transmitted to the areas that are most weak. So there's ligaments around your esophagus, there's ligaments down in your groin. That's why one of the reasons we get groin hernias as well. So there's lots of reasons. Even sleep apnea, for example, I think is playing a role. So again, more and more things out of balance, more and more, it's a domino effect downstream. More and more things are going to happen.
Right.
So the reason why it's kind of worth us spending a little bit of time talking about the surgery that I've done for 27 years is because it's very, very common. And pump inhibitors are very much interfering with the nitric oxide system, which is very important to balancing your cardiovascular system and every system in the body, including your brain. So you, in fact, somewhere here I have a list of about 21 different things that nitric oxide does.
Right.
I'm not going to go through those.
Well, let's just talk about CVD, cardiovascular disease. Each year we lose something like 700,000 people to cardiovascular disease. And when I used to hear these numbers, I'd be like, oh yeah, 700,000, that's a lot of people, stuff like that. But then, now we're in COVID time, and now I'm like comparing numbers to COVID, and I'm going, okay, I think we're at like 90,000, and we've been going for 3 months or something like that. You're like, this is not even close to how many people we're going to lose in cardiovascular disease this year, and so it just kind of brings to light like just how important this is when we see how big of a deal we're making out of 90,000 lives, right? Which is very important. We need to do that, but it's just like, okay, where's the balance in this, and cardiovascular disease, and this book that you turned me on to, and it talks about the nitric oxide pathway and just the endothelial wall of the of the blood vessels, and every reduction. When you have 80% less nitric oxide, you have just a little bit of hardening, and then the plaque builds, and then when you have 60%, then it's plaque builds this much. So like, if there's anywhere you should start when you talk about cardiovascular disease, and pretty much all lifestyle, exercise, sunshine, eating good leafy greens, all these things that we're talking about. Well, what do? They support nitric oxide, right? So but yeah, what's your thoughts on cardiovascular disease and just like, the importance of it and nitric oxide in that?
So yeah, as you talked very early, I was trying to make the connection. So the mystery still is, why did most people that became infected with the virus really do well, but those that had comorbidities not do well? And since this is an area that I've been keep going down the rabbit hole, nitric oxide, and it's so connected to so many things, and it's very interesting. I go, oh my gosh, all of those are related to nitric oxide. I'm very confident that if we tested them with the test strips, none of them would turn pink. And even if we put them the lozenges, they may not turn pink for quite a while, like a month or two. I think they're very out of balance in the area of nitric oxide, which means that their blood vessels are very out of balance. And it's really continues to look that way. So what everybody tuned into early on the virus was the Angiotensin II receptors, because the virus attaches to those. And so the whole question was, well, is that the reason? Well, everybody has plenty of Angiotensin II receptors. The people that are dying more, I don't really believe that that's the reason, because everybody has plenty. They're very important function in both our gastrointestinal system and in our blood system. So what is it related to those? Typically people that have an overexpression of the Angiotensin II receptors have a very bad cardiovascular system and really very poorly function nitric oxide system. So that's where I was kind of making the connection. Pretty much everybody that's obese, not everybody, but almost everybody, when they do the test strips, they're not going to turn pink. So what can they do? Well, we got to work on those things to bring them back in balance. As I mentioned, obesity is not just another sign your body's out of balance. People equate too many calories and then it makes fat, and then you get rid of fat, you're back in balance. And it's much more complex than that. It's really just a sign so many things are out of balance. We got to bring those back in balance. And one of the most important ones is nitric oxide. So don't use Listerine. Brush your teeth instead. If you have to take medicine for your stomach to reduce acid, get that problem fixed. It doesn't have to get fixed this week or this month, but don't go on year after year after year of having to stay on medication. Get it fixed one way or another. Get it fixed. In the meantime, use these lozenges. And the way to do that is get the test strips, lots of test strips. If they turn pink, you don't need the lozenge. That they save your money. If they're not turning pink, keep using them twice a day until they start turning pink.
Yeah. And on that topic of those lozenges, and one of the big benefits of the photobiomodulation, the light bed that we use, is that it produces nitric oxide. So the light is absorbed in that cytochrome C oxidase, and then it is nitric oxide. And just to validate this, even before I knew you, I wanted to see this. And so we did, we took the test strip and we put it in our mouth, and we did a bed session. And then 20, 30 minutes later, we checked, and everybody that checked it, they had a darker color on that. So just doing that, session, a 10, 12 minute session that we do there is just a real nice boost in nitric oxide. And I think that's one of the key benefits. And that's why, these injuries that have been nagging forever, they're getting more blood flow to them. Right. And I kind of just from I'm mechanical engineering background, I kind of almost think of it as like the oil in your car, right? Like it helps the machinery move better, right? And it helps it, without the oil in it, it's going to seize up, and you're going to create, problems with the metal. The metal is going to burn, yield, and then it's going to stick, and then all that kind of stuff. Same thing with that. Would that be a good analogy?
I think it's a great analogy. So, many of the cardiovascular risk factors, you can modify them. You can improve them. And most of them aren't expensive. I mean, exercise is amazing for that. We think exercise is a way to lose weight, and it's actually pretty poor for that. But it's actually one of the best thing for controlling metabolic switches within the cell than anything we have. So exercising, the photomodulation bed is actually fantastic for the nitric oxide and many other things. So if somebody's off, I highly recommend, if they could work in running by and getting in the photomodulation bed very frequently. The more frequently, the better. Then that really potentially help that enzyme and that system correct over time. And that's what we want to do. We're talking about correcting what can be correct. When you're already broken, you're broken. Now you're well within the set care model. There are less things that you can do to make a big difference, but you still need to do those. Like taking medications for the cardiovascular system, you still need to do those. But the system's broken. You want to affect it before it's broken. Right. Be ahead of it. Yeah, you want to be ahead of it. Right. So you want to take care of your car. Well, and you want to test, right? And I don't think people have known that they can test their nitric oxide system and see where they're at. And these lozenges, I don't remember the person who developed these, but they won a Nobel Prize for that, didn't they? I mean, the people who, and they understood how nitric oxide is so important, and that you can test for it. And I mean, it's just so underrated and so underutilized in reaching optimal health and stuff. And I think people
are doing all these things and they're like, oh yeah, I'm doing this, that. Well, they all kind of come back to this pathway and what's happening there. And you know, it's just a good way to think about it. I mean, it's obviously not the end all be all, but it definitely is up there with those top ones. And the other thing you can do is, I mean, in these, in the epigenetic course, we actually have a panel that you can read your genes and kind of see where you're at. And in fact, for me, I have the genetics for not producing a lot of nitric oxide. So, you know, it definitely something that I want to keep up on, and actually probably relates to some of my genetics. I look at, you know, my family, and there's been some history of heart disease and things like that there. So probably relates in some fashion to the nitric oxide.
The Black population has been hit hardest by the COVID virus. And so what's the connection? Well, they had that epigenetic difficulty with nitric oxide. Now, there's many other reasons related also that's a little more centered within the Black population. But nevertheless, that's from an epigenetic point of view, we have an answer to that, because all you got to do is go to PubMed and search Afro-American and ENOS.
Yeah.
And you'll find that, oh, okay, there's lots of studies on this.
Yeah, that with vitamin D, right? And those two are probably something you want to keep up with.
Well, I just got to tell you, you know, vitamin D is very impactful. Nitric oxide is very impactful. There's quite a few things that are, exercise is extremely impactful. But people think an exercise like they got to go run a marathon. No, they basically got to get out of the car, out of the chair, off the couch, and go do something on a regular basis and keep the body moving and build on that over time. And that keeps those metabolic switches working so much better. Our body does not work well from a sedentary point of view. And we've known that in hospital care forever. It's like, you know, if we want this patient to get well, we got to get them out of bed.
Yeah. Yeah. As soon as possible. That's why now it's the first thing they do. You get a knee surgery, they're like on it, get up, get going, you know. it's so true. And it hurts, but hey, that's what you got to do, right? And that's for all of us. And I think that's so important that you say that and I think people think that, oh, I need to go get a CrossFit membership, or oh, I need to go to the gym, I need to go run 6 miles. That's like, no, you just need to get out and get going. So that's, you know, the number one thing. And then you get that under your belt, and then the next step, then the next step. Right. And so it's all taking, you know, the pieces and starting off, just like you said, just getting off the couch, getting going, moving. And that's all you got to do just for now. Maybe that's it. Just 1 hour a walk a day, you know, something like that.
Well, you're exactly right. And Bill and I both have exercised consistently for many, many years. Mm-hmm. The more you do it, the more it becomes easier, but it's really about finding what works well for you. And what happens as a natural occurrence is the more you exercise, you start getting more active, you find things that you like to do, and you start doing more of those. Because why? Because you can now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and something fun that you like to do. And I've been on the other side of the equation, and that was where I was working out too much, and that's what brought me to, you know, cryotherapy and things like that. So you can be part of both. You can be too much, or you can be not enough too.
Well, any athlete struggles with injury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because they're overdoing it. So from a health point of view, yeah, that's the downside of overdoing exercise, is you're going to have more injuries and those kind of things. But you do it because you love it and you have a passion for it.
Yeah, and yeah, before we move off from exercising, that longevity course that we went to, it really drove home the fact of what nitric oxide, without nitric oxide, what's the benefit of strength gains? Are you going to get strength gains?
Going to get what now?
Strength gains. Are you going to gain strength? You're going to gain muscle if you don't have nitric oxide.
No, you're not. So again, going down the rabbit hole, we're talking about the cardiovascular system, but every other system that has the gut, the brain, the muscle, nitric oxide is very important for every one of those. If you want muscle gain, your nitric oxide system better be working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you better. Yeah, I think there was a great study that they came out when they actually did that exact thing that you talked about, which was they used mouthwash after working out, and they took 2 groups, and one did mouthwash after, and the one didn't, and the ones that didn't use mouthwash had a bigger strength gain in their performance versus the ones that used mouthwash. And so and I've read that a long time ago, but ever since I read that and then you've told me about it, I'm like, oh, wow, that makes perfect sense.
You know, Nathan Bryan, I want to point out his name. He's a scientist, PhD in the medical center that has done a lot of the important bench work on nitric oxide. But he did a study within the medical center where they snagged people running around the medical center in their 20s and had them start using an alcohol-based mouthwash and was able to create hypertension in a really short time period.
Wow. Wow. That's impactful, even in their 20s. Yeah. So I don't think people know about that. That's
They
huge.
don't. They don't. And I can tell you, very few gastroenterologists are familiar with the nitric oxide system. They tend to downplay it. They tend to say, well, I'm part of a society of 850,000 members, and nobody's really talking about the impact of proton pump inhibitors on the nitric oxide system. And it's a little bit amazing to me because it's one thing to say, well, I'm not sure you prove cause and effect, but when you've actually worked out a cellular chemical pathway, and then you have several things that you can check and reproducibly get the same answer, that is cause and effect. So it's proven.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But once you take away the therapy of proton pump inhibitors, well, now what else are they going to do?
No, I totally get it. Well, do you have anything else you want to say? I think we covered everything. I mean, you always want takeaways. Takeaways from this would be, just the importance of the nitric oxide and the system and how it's used for optimal health. And, the testing, using the lozenges that you can have. Human Pro. I'll put it in the notes too, Dr. Cliff Thomas. Okay, I'll put it in the notes as well on the Facebook post. And we'll get that out there and order those strips and test them. Let's see, ways that you can boost it: exercise, sunlight, leafy greens. We didn't talk about sleep, but I'm sure sleep helps somewhere in there, but because it helps everything. And photobiomodulation. Anything else on that? Oh, the lozenges.
Yeah, the lozenges, again, are key because a lot of these things, just like if you're on proton pump inhibitors, you're not going to go out and change that right away. And so your answer is this, and there's nothing else that works, by the way. Now, the ordering through my name, it gets it to you for the same price, but it gets you the B12 and methylfolate. So the one thing that I didn't mention is your B vitamins, your glutathione, and various other things kind of need to be in balance too. So the methylfolate, as we know from epigenetics, the MTHFR problem. Mm-hmm. And anyway, so it's going to help you with an area that may be working against you also, and they just built it into the lozenge.
Right. Well, we know it helps with detoxification, so that makes sense. Well, Doc, I appreciate it. We will obviously be in contact. We talk about it every day, so. Yeah. But I just thank you for coming on and spending this 50 minutes. Looks like we've been on 50 minutes, so appreciate that. And as always, we'll talk soon and appreciate it.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks.